I used a 2x4 to support this to keep it from falling on me. You need to remove all 4 nuts. And then carefully lower down the grate. It can be very heavy, or heavier than you may think. A piece of cast iron rather than aluminum. Then you need to either use a stud remover, or what I did was just double nutted the studs and remove the studs. Get a good coating of silicone over the plate. Slide it in and insert the new bolts that come with the unit. Here I used a thin piece of wood so I could support the grate in between the grate that actually drops down. And you'll see why I need to do that, because you have to get underneath here. You may or may not have room to do this on your trailer. You may have to jack it up a little bit to have room, and that's why it's kind of tedious here, as you're in between the grate that drops and the fixed grate that goes back against the boat. Slap all 4 of those in there and make sure you get them good and snug. Then make sure you have room to install the guide bar. Here I had room between the support that was on the boat and the transom of the boat. I used a piece of duct tape to do the layout on. Makes it a lot easier to mark on the surface, for me anyway. So I laid out the proper distance back, making sure that it corresponded with the space underneath that was available to install the guide bar. That located the center of the boat. Here I was able to use my ski rope attachment. You may have to measure. Then laid out the holes utilizing the actual guide. Reduces the math errors that way. Little center punching. You have the bolts that actually attach the unit, as well as you have the holes to drill that allows the Stomp Grate pilot holes, then the appropriate size holes, and the clearance holes for the grate bars that will actuate the Stomp Grate. Assemble nuts and bolts and washers as required. Got my springs attached, ready to go. A little Loctite. May not hurt to have a second pair of hands to hold it in place. And of course, tighten everything down accordingly. Measure the distance and then cut the bars off at the appropriate height. Take your chop saw, good old stainless steel, cut them off to length, then slide them in. Slide them in place with the springs on. I used a pair of bolt cutters to cut mine off. They recommend, I think, a 1 inch extra for tension, and what I found, it was much better to have a little more tension. You may have to experiment around And then put the washer on, get your spring in, bend them around with your vice grips. Again, don't be afraid to experiment a little bit to make sure you think you have the right amount of tension. It's going to hold that up in place. And then the foot pedal that goes on top. Make sure you got a little Loctite on those if it doesn't come with it. You get those done, tighten them down, and your job is complete.